if you can read it.
it.
We are live. What happened?
Saving money on the
Taking it up?
internet.
Taking it up.
Okay, we're gonna call the, December 5th meeting of the Finance Committee meeting for the Castle Rock School Board of Directors, to order. We'll go around the table first and start with introductions. Ms. Brooks?
Denise Brooks, School Board.
Matt Federickson, IT Director.
Ed Salzman, School Board. John Easterly, Union Rep.
Kristen Martell, School Board.
Robert Frazier, Superintendent. Mike Thorwald, School Board.
Mary Ann McKee, School Board.
Andy Block, School Board.
Bill Stone, Business Manager.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board.
Mark Violet, School Board.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Okay, all present and accounted for. Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Violet. We have two board agenda items that we'll be asking for approval to move to the 19th agenda. We have a third item that we will discuss first, but depending on the board's decision, we may need to take a third item to the agenda for approval. And then we have two other discussion items that we'll be covering this evening. So the first two. The first two items are fairly routine, recommending approval for the Council Rock South Junior Prom contract for 2021. The total dollar amount is estimated to be $29,464. That's based on a minimum participant count of 400. No change in the venue, no change in the terms of that agreement, so we ask for approval on that. And then the second routine item is to update our voting delegates for the Bucks County Tax Collection Committee. That is the governing body of school districts and municipalities responsible for EIT collections. So with the board's recent appointment of Cheryl Rubanich as Assistant Business Administrator, we're recommending that she become the alternate delegate. I will remain as the primary delegate. Any questions? Okay, so we're at the first sort of critical juncture in the budget development process regarding whether or not to adopt a preliminary budget or whether to approve what is known as the Act 1 opt-out resolution. So you have a comparison of the two options before you. The preliminary budget route is a more labor-intensive route. It requires preparation of a complete budget prior to that January 29th deadline and would require the board to take action on that preliminary budget. The reason that you take that route is to preserve the right to file for the Act 1 exceptions, which would allow the board to increase taxes over and above the 2.6% Act 1 index that's been approved for 2021. So obviously, the second column here, the opt-out resolution, which has historically been the route that this board has taken since the adoption of Act 1, it limits the tax increase to that Act 1 index of 2.6%, and no ability to apply for the exceptions. You obviously don't prepare the full preliminary budget. This is known as the accelerated option, and the deadline for that approval would be January 9th. So based on the board meeting schedule, that would need to happen at the 19th meeting. This is a presidential election year, so this timeline is accelerated by a month. All of the dates on the Act 1 timeline are based on the primary election, which in a presidential election year happens in April rather than May. So those dates are a little bit sooner, so the board will be required to act accordingly. I put this together. It's not the original deck that I sent out to the board, but I think it helps us understand the administration's recommendation to the board to elect the opt-out resolution as it has in most years past. So this chart comes out of our financial planning software scenario, and the red solid line is expenses and doesn't change in any of these scenarios. So again, this is a very rough estimate trying to calculate the value of not applying for the exceptions this year, just so that the board has that information. The dashed blue line here is the total revenue in what we call our expected scenario. So you see this in the 2020 budget year, the year we're living in now, the numbers are basically break even, and then we move into projected years here. So In the expected scenario, the dashed line, the increase would be 2.6%. In the solid blue line scenario would be using the exceptions, which I've estimated to be about an additional 0.3% tax increase that the board, if it elected to do that, could go above that index. So instead of a 2.6%, it could do a 2.9%. And that is based totally on best estimates of data that we have available right now. The exceptions are getting smaller. There's less revenue available. The state made a change recently, probably 2013 or 2014, to sort of limit the growth of the exceptions because there were some of the, I think the rationale was that the exceptions were giving increases higher than what the legislature might want to see. So they pulled back on those exceptions, and you only get the value of the increase in the PSERS rate on your 2011-12 salaries. So there's no acceleration based on our salary costs in the last 10 years. So that exception probably last year was about $600,000. I'm expecting that this year would be about $500,000.
But just remind me, it's always based on that window, the perpetuity, or does it roll?
It is the lesser of your salary in 2011-12 or current year. So in just about every case, it's going to be 2011-12. So it's hard to see, but there's just a very slight difference in the 2021 projected column. That's about $500,000 in revenue. So that's not a material amount of money on a $250 million budget. But then when you extrapolate this out, if you were to choose a tax increases over and above the index, or if the index were to be higher, then you do see that there's a compounding effect over the years. So in this particular year, because we do know that the closer you are to your baseline year, the better your projections are. We know that this variance is not significant. But as you go a little bit further out, there's lots more assumptions and unknowns. So that's just a little bit of a sort of paint the picture of why we believe it's still appropriate to make the recommendation to stay within the Act 1 index limit. If the index were less than 2.6%, we may be having a different conversation about whether or not to do that. We might want to take a different route. And certainly, you can see the impact of what happens each and every year. The board would choose not to take advantage of exceptions. You can see that gap does widen. And eventually, you do reach a point, again, all else equal, that revenues would be greater than expenses, and that would be a good position to be in. So, but again, that's more of a philosophical decision than a practical decision for what we need to do in the next couple of weeks. Any questions about the resolution versus preliminary budget?
The dollar amount this next year is like $500,000?
Yeah, about $500,000.
And then what else?
It does. That's, in this year, it's known what the index is. It's not known what the index will be in any of these 4 years, and the value of the exception is unknown in those 4 years. So it could go with an index of 2.1%. Both of these lines could go down more in this area here. So.
That's a good point, because it increases the millage, right? So that millage increase is always going to be the new baseline for the following year. So it's not as though we're resetting that $500,000.
You'll come to that going forward.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I could ask this, just explain the lines again, because I'm not quite sure what the dotted line is representing.
So the dotted line is when we looked at the projection model, we were using an average Act 1 index increase that we've seen over the last 11 years, about 2.2%. So in this year, we know it's 2.6. In the out years, we're using 2.2%. So the solid blue line is the tax increases that we used, assuming the optimistic scenario or higher Act 1 index. We're similarly stated that if the board utilized exceptions, so one or the other.
Okay.
And those increases were more in the neighborhood of 3% and higher, and it was based on the information from the independent fiscal office who made those projections. So that's why those lines are, the revenues are higher in those lines. But again, those are projections just as we make projections on our expenses.
And the solid blue line was 2.6, I mean.
No, that's in the, I'm looking for
That's
the
what he was talking about.
email. I'm trying to find.
Projections with the exception, that would represent close to 3%.
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basically compounding 3% or 2.2%, right?
Basically,
That's your window.
So, philosophically, for me, I have a difficult time thinking about increasing or adding the exceptions on an ongoing basis. We agreed to look at it last year, but we had the idea that none of us really wanted to go down that path. The concern I have, though, from a fiscal point of view, is this is showing the optimistic fund approach, right? The optimistic approach in which I at least have a concern that we're going to continue on that trend. So for me, if we have to vote on this, I think you said by our next meeting, right? So we have to act very quickly. Can we see at least one other scenario? And I forget what the other scenario was called. We had an optimistic.
Yes, there is a lower Act 1 index scenario, which I will not be able to get on the screen for you to see, but I can certainly send it.
But we know next year.
We know next year, right, so I did pull up the dashed blue line is a 2.6% increase, the solid blue line is 2.9%. So that's assuming the value of the index.
Go ahead and build the base now.
Exactly, because it's not about this year, next year, or the following year, it's about 2025 and out, right? That's the concern. And again, philosophically, if you ask me, what about exceptions, I say no, right? But economically, what if it means that we're cutting programs we don't want to cut, and we don't, we're in a much different situation, I just don't know.
The increases, forgive me, the increase is moving out our 2022 on 3.2, 3.4, 3.6, 3.2. Those are straight out of the IFO's projection.
And so if we have three different scenarios we can look at, right? Optimistic, pessimistic, let's call it,
And our expected.
neutral, right?
Could you just state what the IFO
Independent Fiscal Office, think tank out of Harrisburg.
So I don't know how,
Would it make sense to just think about, like, I know last year we were thinking about just having that ability. So even if we didn't want to do it, it just gave us the time to consider it. So does it make sense to just think about having more time to say yes or no?
it may, if that's the thought of the board.
No, but it changes the whole approach of how they prep the.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
Bill's got
it
more
does.
work to do.
And in a very small window.
And how much work is there for us to have the flexibility to do more? So, from my perspective, I look back at you guys, appreciate what Mark says a lot. In a perfect world, would love you to do all the work, so we have that flexibility. However, you guys know how much work that is, so, whatever you guys are recommending, I'll be supportive of.
Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate what Bill has already said. So our recommendation is to opt out of the exceptions. And that's not done easily. Mark, I hear what you're saying, and I can't disagree with what you're saying. All I know is that we don't want to come in, even at 2.6 if we don't need to, much less above it. So I think that, we're going to have more of a long-term look, and dig into the numbers a little bit more. But, 2.6 is a healthy number. That's a healthy tax increase on top of, the tax increases that we've had for the past 3-4 years. So I would be really reticent to go above 2.6. So just for the sake of our tax base, for the sake of our community.
Does that give you enough comfort with the additional guidance counselors we talked about and some other needs in the overall budget?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously it makes it more difficult, and, it's all a give and take. but it's a give and take that we're comfortable with. I think, you know, our job is to consider not only the educational needs and the support needs, but obviously every tax dollar that comes into the district as well. So that's what our recommendation is based on.
So can I devil's advocate this just for a second?
Absolutely.
And again, you know, I don't want to increase taxes. I think everyone knows that, right? But I'd really like to see a projection, and I don't think it's too much work for Bill to do projections against the rock lock, the schedule changes, all the different, you know, all the different things we want to do, and the ability to do that if we're giving up potential funding. Because as a taxpayer, I think if someone told me, this is what we need to do over a period of time to do the things we need, and then we can pull back, because we can always stay steady after a period of time, if we hit the optimistic scenario, which, again, I don't believe that we're going to do over the next decade, right, or even the next 5 years, because we can pause. Now, it's not going to be us, it's going to be another board, right? Not me, anyway. But I'd like to see that data before we make that decision, and I think we can do that pretty quickly. We can probably do that by the end of the week, right, or by the end of next week, to at least look at the scenario.
You initially asked for what does a lesser increase scenario look like?
Right.
It's on my screen right now. So that's
That's the dash line.
yeah, that's right. So I can provide that quickly.
Yeah.
As far as layering in some of these other initiatives, that's a little bit more complicated, but, you know, we can certainly take a look at it and see what it looks like. I will say that, you know, the exceptions from my perspective are becoming less of a benefit, a revenue benefit than they were in years past. They used to be in the, you know, millions of dollars because you were getting lots for your special ed costs, you were getting lots for your PSERS rate because they hadn't pegged it back to that base year of 11, 12. You were getting the value of PSERS on salary increases as well. So there will reach a point where exceptions, we won't qualify for the exception. And if you recall last year, the district did not qualify for the PSERS exception, I believe. It only qualified for the special education exception. So we will eventually stop qualifying for them, and it will be solely based on whether or not, you know, what the Ackman Index provides. So that, I say all that because that means that there's work that will have to be done regardless of exceptions or the Ackman Index on that red line, or revenue line, or, excuse me, the expenditure line.
Am I thinking incorrectly if I say that, well, $500,000 may not sound like a lot compared to our budget? $500,000 over 5 years is $2.5 million at a baseline, yes?
Every year, but remember that 500 will decline each year. Could because
But it raises the millage, right, but it raises the...
Your base
Right.
millage goes up.
That's
The
right.
base, yeah, the millage, yes, you are correct, the base millage goes up.
So it's $2.5 million over that period of time that may be needed, right? And if it stalls then, it stalls then. I don't know, again, I'm not excited about the idea of applying for these exceptions, but I think we just need to know all the options. If we choose not to do it, we need to know, all the
How
ramifications.
much work are we asking you to do to fill out the paperwork for?
You would get a very rough estimate of where we might think the budget would go, and it would be more of a mathematical exercise than it would be this is really what we're going to spend.
I guess I was actually, filling out the PDE forms for the exceptions.
That's what I mean.
Is that what it is? That's what you have to submit?
Yes, it would be a mathematical exercise.
No one else?
What's everybody else think? I hear you.
I wanted to ask one thing. If you did the projection showing, let's say we did not take it this year, but then took it the next few years, would that change the solid blue line much? Could you run that number to see?
I have,
You know what I'm saying?
not infinite possibilities, but I have a number of possibilities. I can change it to any number in any year. And then
With
change.
talk, just so he could see the option of what it looked like if we didn't do it this year, but then decided we would do it the next 2 years. I probably doesn't make much of a difference.
Cumulatively, it does.
Cumulatively, it does.
It does.
See how much it makes an effect, just let's compare what it is now versus what it is.
And you're saying if we want to do it now, it's a better time than delayed.
Yeah, well, sure, because we know what it is now compared to what it's and you have a chance to build up that baseline. If it were, my druthers would be, let's leave it on the table for discuss. I understand it's more work, I understand we've got to, but it's an accelerated year, I get all that, but, in my opinion, I wouldn't want to be at the budget table saying, geez, I wish we would have had that opportunity. Understanding Act One is a healthy level, all those things, I would just want to keep that possibility open. That's me, for the exceptions.
Yeah, and I don't think, not to represent this for Bill, because I'm not the one doing it, I don't think this is a workload issue as much as it is just, hey, what's our read on our budget, short term and obviously long term. So,
So I think you're getting a general sense with this chart here, that if you choose to do a tax increase to the index of 2.6%, you'd be at that blue dot on the dash, on the dotted line. And then if you utilize the exceptions, there's another second dot just slightly above it that you can't really see. So if then you chose to, in the following year, if the index were 2.2%, and that was the increase, you'd be here. But if then the increase in the following year were 2.9 and then 3.2, I believe. Did you write this down? You did. So this shows you what 2.9 plus 3.2. That's where that puts you. This shows you 2.6 plus 2.2.
Let me go back to my original question before we get caught up in the numbers, because I don't think they matter based on what you just said. The question that you're asking is, the amount of work that it takes to do the work that you have to if you don't take the exception, or if you don't take the opt-out, doesn't sound like it's a lot of work. So if it's not a lot of work to provide us with that option, then in my mind, the question is, okay, why wouldn't we leave ourselves that option to Mark's point? And one could say, public perception of what we're doing and what that means, and I might have been a little bit more nervous about that last year, but frankly, last year it came up and nobody said anything, and I think it was smart. We did it for, slightly different reasons, but, it's not a lot of work. Why wouldn't we leave an option open?
The amount of work would be trying to consider the educational initiatives and cost out those educational initiatives in these out years. So if you wanted to look at some things that might be imminently on the table, that's less work.
As a part of this budget cycle, the budget cycle work is what you have to do.
We're more concerned about what paperwork you have to
Yeah, you have to do the preliminary budget as opposed to not. How much work is that? Because for me, if that's so onerous that the opt-out makes sense and you're confident, I'm happy to go that way. If the statement is to do the preliminary budget, not that big a deal, then why would you leave the option? And that's the way I look at this.
Right. So there's an additional month to put that together. It will not be if you were to look at the budget documents that I put together, it will not be
That's okay.
reflective of
Yeah,
reality.
that's
I
okay.
want to make sure everybody's
Right.
right. Yeah, so it would be a mathematical.
Bureaucratic exercise is what it is.
Indeed, it is, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, not a snapshot of where we're going to be.
Is there a reason not to do it? I mean, again, we don't want to burden you, back.
yeah, no, I think perception is a piece, although I agree, last year was very quiet in that regard. I would just say that, we sort of just alluded to it, that we left that open last year, and the thought process at that point was, hey, we got a new BA, let's, give that a shot. But nobody really had, much of an appetite to go there unless we absolutely had to go there. So I would say, if the majority of the board, if the will of the majority of the board is to absolutely, genuinely be open-minded to going above the index, then it's worth it. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So, and I don't want to.
That way, that changes it.
I don't want to misrepresent the workload. I'm not saying that it's not a lot of work, because frankly, I'm not sure how much work it is. What I'm saying is, I don't think that should dictate the decision.
I mean, that's sort of where I was thinking, in as much as, without benefit of the conversation of what's going into the budget and what the whole situation is, to my thinking, the reality of being in a place where the administration would recommend a higher tax increase than 2.6, and getting 5 of us to agree to that, just in the context of the generalities that we know, I'd say that seems unlikely. And so I'm more comfortable, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but in a philosophical conversation, totally makes sense. But as I think about how this process goes and where we are likely to land on what you would recommend and where a majority of this board would ultimately fall, I think it's pretty unlikely that we would go above the index.
And based on what you said before, we won't hold you to this, your goal is to get under that, as all of ours would be. 0 would be wonderful, but if you're listen, if you're comfortable enough to be able to say, hey, we're shooting for something much lower than that, so we could come back, if we still have Mark's concerns, there's no reason why we can't go to the index, to hedge. Because I appreciate what Mark's saying.
Yes, as do I.
But then he-
Well, I appreciate that, and the thing I always said in the past was, in the first, 4 years that I didn't vote for a tax increase, is because we didn't have, in my opinion, the information we needed to make that decision. Now we have a lot of information. A lot of the information Bill has put together is seriously eye-opening. So I think it's different this year, for me, than it was last year when I'm looking at exceptions. Because again, I just say it again, I am not worried about 2020, 21, I'm worried about longer out on that curve. And I don't want to be in a situation where we should have done something this year to affect the kids going through next, in the next 10 years. So my vote would be, let's leave it on the table. I don't want to dismiss the amount of work that has to be done, but sometimes we have to do the work to get to the answer. And I think if the evidence shows that we need to have that
Then we
increase,
can always do it.
then we can always do it.
Right.
And I think you could get 5 people to reasonably say, okay, yes, over time we have to do it. And if the evidence is there that shows this is what's going to be best for the district over 5 years, I think we could have that support.
And especially if we rough in the rock block and the block scheduling and those, if we rough those into your projections, it may become very eye-opening. And this gives us that little bit of wiggle room.
I think we have a robust strategic plan here.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work we're doing today is a couple years down the road. It would be nice, to Mark's point, and I like the way you're thinking, about giving us a little flexibility. Because we don't know what's down the road. We don't know what twists and turns. And again, going back to guidance counselors, I think having that ability to have it kind of makes a little bit of sense, or a lot of sense.
I'm agreeing with Mark.
What do you think? You've been quiet.
I think, when I asked the question about, it seemed like last year we just have flexibility, like that makes sense to me, especially if it's not too much of a burden on you, and the administration. I don't think people want to go above that index, but to Ed's point, we have a lot going on, so I just wouldn't mind modeling it out, and then knowing that we're good, and we don't have to go down that path anymore. So I still like just a little bit of that
Buys us
flexibility.
some time.
Yeah, really, I don't think that anyone will really want to, but if it seems like it's a choice between one of these, big initiatives or not, I think we need time to think about that.
Well, and again, if the data comes in, then we can implement something faster. And now we have some flexibility in the budget as well.
Well, and also the rock block and later start time, not block scheduling, whoever
Sure.
said that, to correct for anybody that's listening at home.
Yeah, I said that, my bad.
I remember, but, yes,
It was,
is the following year.
yeah.
So it's to sort of plant the seed, set the landscape for that.
Mhm.
I just asked Bill when he needs to know if you want to opt out or go. So I want to try and see if we can get us, instead of saying, hey, I want to see some more models, trying to see if we can get the room to a place that says, hey, it's worth not opting out and taking the exception, or, doing the preliminary budget that way, so that gives us time to do models as opposed to having to do a whole bunch of work between now and sometime before the 19th, to get it on the agenda for the 19th? Is everybody comfortable kind of putting a sword in the ground? Let me ask you this way, who's in favor of doing the preliminary budget as opposed to opting out at this point?
Well, I am.
All things considered now,
I think so.
Yeah, I am.
Sounds like you're.
Yeah, I'm moved by this conversation because I was thinking along the same lines as Robert, which is, it's not worth the effort if there's absolutely no chance the majority of the board would support exceeding the Act One index. And based on the recent history that I've been part of, I was thinking that that's where we were. And then some comments I just heard around the table indicate that there's more flexibility in that respect than I would have guessed.
Got some big
So-
initiatives, yeah.
I don't think it's flexibility to go above, I think it's we've got better data now.
That's it.
Robert did,
Well, that's not what I
it
heard.
was a lot of work.
I heard more open-mindedness if circumstances required it to consider going to Act One. So if that's the way people are thinking, then I support the preliminary budget
Well,
idea.
now that the target of the conversation is much more specific than it had been. We're talking about guidance counselors, we're talking
Yeah.
about later start times, we're talking,
Yeah.
these are things that are really on the
It's
horizon.
program-oriented and not tax-oriented.
I'll just say philosophically, I'm not into raising taxes above at all. But from the long-term projections, I do worry about not padding the coffers for future years, but I tend to go with the administration and say, that's why I'd like to see what it looked like. We didn't do it this year, but then projected it out for the next 5 years. I bet you it doesn't make that much of a difference. But to Mark's point, I agree with that, but it's going to be hard for me to ever vote for an Act One, above the Act One increase this year anyway, even though it may, that would be your recommendation anyway. At the beginning of the conversation, we have to look at the other side of the scale too, and see what we can do to control the expenses. But, so, I'm okay, because you guys already probably have a majority here to go forward with it, but.
Sounds like we have a will of the board.
Probably contrary to that.
I wrote down two things that I will prepare in the interim period. Our finance committee meeting in January is late, so, I will, calculate the value of the actual value of the exception, based on, PDE's information that they have available currently. It'll be an estimate, but it'll at least give us, instead of estimating 500,000, it'll tell us what, a little bit better number. And then we're about to have a discussion about some project funding, and I can layer that in, plus we'll take a look at rock block and things of that nature, and layer those in, and we won't do, we won't do shotgun tax increase modeling, but I can provide some general curves that will look similar to this and show some highs and some lows so that the board has a sort of a range of where those curves could go based on decisions that are made in any particular year.
Let me ask this, so your deadline is the 9th of January, right? Is that what I just?
The
29th?
if the deadline to pass the resolution is the 9th of January. The deadline to prepare and submit a preliminary budget is the 29th of
Okay.
January.
So we got
We have to vote at the
Our next-
January meeting, which is the 23rd.
On the preliminary budget.
On the
Oh, we have to, we have to vote to, you to tell you to do this?
By the
If you-
19th.
No, if you choose if we pass the 9th, you would not be able to take the opt-out resolution. We would have to then prepare a preliminary budget. Doesn't mean we have to file for exceptions, but.
So what you're getting tonight is the direction to do that, we don't need to formally vote this direction, got it?
But yeah, I think we have to vote on that at the 19th, December 19th.
You do not have to,
Okay.
the only vote you would have to.
We don't
take on
have
the
it.
19th is if you wanted to adopt the resolution not to exceed the impact.
Yeah, what Bill just said is the key. So if we were going to opt out of the exceptions, then we would need to vote on the 19th.
Thank you.
I don't, Mark, let me ask you the question, because you're running the meeting. I had a question that is kind of sort of related to this, but not completely. and if you want to put it off, or if I can find out, over time.
Just, we're watching, got a mind.
Yeah, we got one more thing to write.
Two, but middle one is, yeah,
So, FAC, at the first meeting, I know they'll be watching this, I'd be interested to hear on how they weigh on this, any feedback on how that,
I have an update for that.
Okay.
At the end.
oh, perfect.
All right. So I want to introduce the concept of major impacts to our budget development process. The reason for this is to highlight for the board what are the significant items on the expenditure budget that are impacting budget development. So these are new or non-recurring purchases that are greater than $50,000. So it's not a contract that we've had in place for years and years and years. And if it's new this year and then recurs, you only hear about it in the year that it's implemented, okay? Or if it's something that we're just buying one time, then this is the time you'll hear about it. So we'll do 2 rounds of these during budget development. And the thinking behind that is that early on, certain things are going to be included in the budget, but as ed initiatives develop and the budget changes in the early spring, we want to have another look at that and see if there's changes that might be made. But keep this perspective in mind when we look at these major impacts. They're all under consideration. You've not taken any action on the budget, obviously. These are just submissions at this point into the development process. And you should not always assume that these major impacts are over and above current year spending. So a couple of these items are in the operations budget. It's not necessarily fair to say that the operations budget is going to increase by these amounts. There may be decisions made to reduce in other areas to be able to afford some of these expenses. So that's the perspective I want you to keep in mind when you think about major impacts. But these are the kinds of expenses that move the needle on our budget process. So here's the first round of those major impacts. And the first 2 of them relate directly to a strategic plan goal, that being safety and security, goal number 3, and are aligned with the strategy for the district's safety and security master plan. The first one is to upgrade our camera and proximity card reader systems. So these are for our fobs at the doors and for our camera systems. Right now, we have a tiring system that doesn't interface well with a lot of our platforms, and so it's difficult at times to get information out of the system. This new program, Genetec, is a little bit more able to interface with multiple types of softwares. That's pretty well said, man? Okay, thank you.
How old is our current system? It feels like it's new.
No, the system we have, the exact system we have is probably 7, 8 years old. The camera system and then the card access system. I mean, we've been putting them into buildings, but the system itself is probably older than that.
You're not replacing the hardware then, you're replacing.
We have to replace the hardware in some of the buildings to make it compatible with the Genetec system. But the nice thing about the Genetec system is that it is more open to other systems, so it gives us a lot more flexibility. The bottom line is the system we have now is not designed for an enterprise environment, and we're going to be very soon exceeding over 1,000 cameras, which makes it an enterprise environment. And
Okay.
yeah, so it's time for us to upgrade.
So you see 2 figures on the screen here. $358,000 is the one-time purchase cost outright. The company does have a lease option, which would reduce the initial cash outlay over a 5-year period to $86,000 per year. So that's something that Matt and Doug and I have to work through, sort of the details around whether there's value in leasing that covers the maintenance costs, and in a world of changing technology, I'm a little bit more open-minded now to, I would have probably, I buy cars, I don't lease cars, so I tend to lean that way in recommendations, but this is a little bit a different situation. But we do need to research into, the financing costs and whether, it's through their financing providers, so that may not necessarily be the best deal for us. So that's why you see 2 numbers up there, but regardless, either one of those qualifies as a major impact.
What happens at the end of the lease?
I don't even have a copy of the lease yet, so I don't know any of that information.
At the end of the lease, the system becomes ours, or we can choose to renew it. The advantage of doing it the lease is we get constant upgrades to the system, and then it becomes just an operation, a line item in the operating budget. You know, you're gonna be spending that every year or about that money, so you're ongoing, you're constantly keeping the system up to date, which is, from a technology perspective, much easier than every 5 years coming back and saying you spend around $360,000.
Yeah.
I guess you know how I feel about it.
I agree. The second item there, the alerted communication tool, this is an app that is able to send through lots of different connected devices, cell phones, PCs, voice phones, walkie-talkies, display boards, fire alarms, information about any kind of emergency event. So the tool itself is about $50,000. But we also have to consider associated with this any areas in the district where our cell phone signal is weak. And so that would require first a study of where we need to have additional coverage, because if we purchase this on our current network, I know that we do have some areas in the district where it is exceptionally difficult to get a cell phone signal, and then it's kind of silly to have a communication tool that doesn't work. So that outlay for the booster system that would improve the cellular signal in the buildings is a more significant cost increase, would probably fall into the summer project type work, but this is at least something that we want to begin studying to try to implement that as part of the strategic.
Is that something we might want to consider talking to any of the big carriers about, getting provisions?
Cell phone providers?
Getting provisions for equipment in our buildings for advantage rates on towers?
They're more expensive.
I'm sorry?
They're more expensive. They will not put booster systems in our buildings for free, we have to pay.
No, I understand that, but there's
Like
some other.
renting some space for
If there's
cell-
some other benefit to them that we can find with our local governments, they might be willing to do that, whether it be tower spacing or.
It's a dicey subject, though.
No, I don't.
I mean-
No, but I'm just saying, having said on the other side of that, that's, there might, and there's unlimited resources in those companies, literally. I mean, I know what you're talking about too, but. Anyway.
The third item is, about as pretty cut and dry as you can get. DEP is mandating that we get stormwater inspection, and we have to do it. And we're going to estimate it at about $60,000. So that's an early estimate. The municipalities are the ones that administer this. They're still developing guidance around this, so we're not really certain where this will fall, but we're planning for it nonetheless, because it is a mandate. And then the last item is a new way to think about positions that may be needed in the budget, but aren't known until after the budget is developed. So 2 examples that we can use. The first is elementary school teacher enrollment. So we have sort of this June 1st deadline, we have a June 1st deadline for when we make decisions about our enrollment, but children continue to enroll throughout the summer, and there are sometimes additional teachers that are needed. So we have traditionally identified specific positions. Last year in particular, we said there are 2 elementary school, additional elementary positions in the budget, and at that point in time where the board has to take action on the budget before that deadline, it's unknown whether those positions are in the budget, and decisions can be made based on data that's not fully developed, because we have several months to go. Similarly, special education aides, instructional aides, those are positions that may not materialize until we see a new student come into the district, which could happen at any point during the year. So in lieu of specifically putting positions identified in the budget, my proposal is that we put in what I'm calling a staffing contingency. So it would be a flat dollar amount that would be used for those positions that might crop up during the year after the board has already approved the budget. If that money, that contingency money is not used, it returns to fund balance, which is the same thing that happens now if we budget for a teacher position and that position is never filled. So it's the same thing, it's just sort of de-identifying the,
We still hold $750,000 contingency fund. We wiped that out, what, about 5, 6 years ago?
right, so it is.
I don't know why we ever heard.
So I used 0.2% of our salary and benefit budget to come up with this range here. So once the budget is developed, that number will become more specific. But it was a little bit of, trying to find a way to make it a percentage of the budget, but also that it felt like it could accommodate some of the historical needs that we've had. So that 2 elementary positions and a couple of instructional aides would fall in that $350,000 to $400,000 range.
And I'll tell you, I really like this idea. Bill's the one who came up with this and brought it to cabinet a couple weeks ago. Really, from a dollar standpoint, it's pretty well consistent with what we did last year anyway, but by de-identifying it, we might need 1 elementary teacher, we might not need any, we might need 3. It's hard to say. Same thing with special education, teaching assistants, and, so for instance, right now, this week, we have a couple new English language learner students at the middle level who have significant needs. So in the next update I sent you, I'll represent that and some thoughts around staffing with that piece that goes hand in hand with this. So I really like the flexibility.
It wouldn't be used for anything other than staffing?
Absolutely not. I would think so.
Okay, and
Right.
that's the difference.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Mayor? Bill, what was the contingency in last year's budget?
We had no.
That's what I thought.
Years.
Yeah, seems like a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah. Good. All right, very good. The last item for our discussion is a follow-up to the November Finance Facilities Committee meeting where we talked about our summer project funding, and the thinking here is now to try to give you a recommended number for what to fund for our summer work, so that Doug can begin to put bids out and develop his plan. So there's three assumptions that I used when I calculated this, the value of this. That we had a surplus of $880,000 at the end of last fiscal year. So that is over and above our current fund balance level. That's available for transfer. And I want to then, the second item is keep that general fund balance level. So try not to withdraw, transfer any funds over and above that surplus amount so that our fund balance doesn't decline. The other item is in our capital reserve fund, which is the fund that is used to pay for this project. We would keep a minimum amount of money in there, $250,000, just in case of, something else popping up, sort of like a safety net for what we need. So those were the 3 assumptions that went into the calculation which you're going to see here. MBIT, we are assuming that it'll be funded with cash over multiple years. I do still believe that is the most cost-effective way to pay for the project when you look at the financing costs associated with a borrowing of that size. At the time I put this together, I was awaiting updated draw schedules. I got them at about 4:45 today, so I didn't update this slide, but I did update the next slide to show the calculation. So we right now have just shy of $3 million in our capital reserve fund. We have projects remaining that are still being paid at about $525,000 that need to come off of that. So it's sort of, those are the outstanding checks in your checkbook. The operating surplus, I put graphs in there, the auditors have not officially finalized, but that number is probably pretty solid. When we transfer that in, that's a plus to that 2.75. And then the last item is the $250,000 minimum amount to retain in that capital reserve fund to get us to available funds of $3.08 million in the capital reserve. Okay? So based on the data that I got this afternoon and quickly analyzed, I'd like to take a little bit more time to look at it. But we are looking at the MBIT, if everything is approved as is, MBIT would be looking for some additional, some funding initially of about $444,000. That's our share, that's not the total share. They'd be looking for that pretty soon, March, and that would have to come out of our capital reserve fund. Then the remaining funding will come out sometime in the 2021 year, so likely before we're having this same discussion next year. So it really is an impact of about $1 million, which the first draft of this presentation showed that there was a high end and a low end. It is a little bit closer to the high end, based on just the timing of needing initial funding to get procurement going and do the planning costs, and then to have a second influx of cash as the projects begin to get constructed. So that leaves funding available for CR summer projects of $2.054 million. And that is the number that Doug and I and Dr. Frazier have talked about as being the number that we'll proceed with as our budget for summer projects this upcoming summer. So,
That's $1 million less than you usually do. You're comfortable with that?
Probably $2 or $3 million less than Doug.
That we need.
So here's your historical graph here. So in these 2 years, 18, 19, where the funds were, the budget amount, not the actual spending, the budget amount was allocated 4.7 and 3.7. It had been $3 million in these 2 years prior. Those years we had higher surpluses than we did this year. We had $880,000 this year, which is, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of $2-3 million for these 2 years. So there was more funds available to transfer. And when you factor in MBIP here, that gets you to basically the same level of what we had in funding, but obviously, in total, the dark blue is counting off the light blue is MBIP. So that it certainly takes a bite out of the apple.
1/3.
They're killing us.
So there are some pivot points here that, the board can make decisions on that funding amount, because you've absolutely identified one of the main concerns with that dollar amount is that the budgeted request was $4.25 million. So significantly less than that, and it's going to increase the amount of deferred work, so that $6 million is going to grow. So a couple of things, sort of, from the smallest being, we could reduce that minimum fund balance and throw a few more dollars out into the project.
Well, let me just ask you a question, it's setting the baseline, that whatever it is, $2 million. Is that, in the administration, in Doug's opinion, being irresponsible, is my first question, or can we get away with this if we had to?
I don't believe it's being irresponsible. I think it's,
Is Doug, are you guys collectively of thought on that?
Well, when you talk about being responsible or irresponsible, obviously, you have both the facility side and the finance side. So given the totality of this, obviously Doug's not thrilled
I'm
with
sure
this,
he's not
but,
happy, but it's
yeah,
jumping up and down saying, if we don't do this because I don't have enough money, something's gonna fall on you.
no.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
to me, we're, given the realities that we're looking at here on both ends of this, we're striking the balance that we need to strike.
And he's aware of this?
Yes.
yes. Yes. So this, if you think back to the project list, and I do believe Doug is going to provide an update based on this information next week at the Facilities Committee, there were 2 large projects that were comprising that $4.25 million. The first was the turf and track project at Walt Snyder Stadium, and then resurfacing tennis courts and basketball courts at CR South. The second project being about $1.5 million. The first, I think, was in the 1.8 range. That turf project is essentially, that's committed to, and so that's going to come out of that $2 million. We talked about, because we're not under any time constraints necessarily with respect to this transfer here, we talked about taking all of those projects out for bid to see if there were any efficiencies that could be gained, because right now we've got the turf project at CR South, turf resurfacing at CR North, and track resurfacing. If you we may be able to see some efficiencies with that tennis court project because a contractor could bid on it as a package. So the costs to put it out to bid and document it are only incremental, and it carries forward into future years. So there is some logic to, even though we might not have the funding available, it is probably worthwhile to spend the $65,000-$70,000 or so dollars that it would take to document and put that basketball and tennis court resurfacing project out to bid, see where the numbers come in, and then we can make a decision on whether or not that is, the prices are attractive enough to warrant transferring additional funds out of the general fund in order to pay for it. So although this number right now is low, it's based on project cost estimates and a transfer that doesn't need to be done at any point. It can be done when we have the information that we need to make a good decision about it. So we also can
I
decide.
just want to give like a 5-minute warning here.
Yeah,
This is a really great discussion. Just, what are you looking for from us on this? I'm not trying to shut you down. So what kind of direction do you need from us?
The direction that, we asked for at the Joint Finance Facilities Committee that we just needed sort of a number, a nod of the head that this is, we're not asking you to approve a budget. We're going to be looking for, Doug's going to be asking you to, at this committee meeting to say, these are the projects I'm taking out to bid. You now know sort of the financial realities of where we're going to be. So there's no action that's needed on this for tonight. It's just, this is kind of the, yes.
I like the thinking on the bidding for everything and seeing what you might be surprised.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the only other point that I'll make, and I do see that we have limited time, is that there are other options to fund NBIT. And the other way to fund it is to do a borrowing through their authority, which is, as I said, it's more costly when you look at just pure dollars. The district would spend about $3.6 million for $2.5 million of work. But the impact, it obviously does not come out of our capital reserve fund. It increases our operating budget by about $85,000 a year. So it's a, there's a choice here. If the board were so inclined to say $3.1 million of funding for Council Rock summer projects, that decision could be made, and a pivot could be made on the funding for MDI2.
Okay. Just one other thing, we don't need to talk about it tonight, but I had asked about borrowing to cover all the future projects today and how that would look. So I'd love to hear more about that.
The January Finance Committee meeting, I intend to maybe not January, but February, I'd like to reevaluate our overall financing plan and bring in the deferred work and the incremental costs associated with borrowing some additional funds to knock out that deferred work so that we're then just funding current maintenance.
Absolutely. We've had several mini conversations. Good that you brought that up last time, Martin.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. Any quick comments or questions?
The FAC, unless you want to move that to another time.
The FAC had a meeting on about 2 Fridays ago, just very introductory, good meeting. We have another meeting scheduled for Monday afternoon where the education about school finance and Council Rock finance begins. So I will be preparing some documents that I would like to share with the board just so that you can see a little bit more about my philosophy around certain things and sort of how I see the school finance work. So that will be happening on Monday.
How many people do you have participating?
We had all but one participate in the first meeting, but I do expect that we'll have all 12 of them.
Great.
Marvelous, great.
Yeah, quiet group initially, but that's really good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Nice job.